Another viewer wrote in, Father, and asked how to respond to people who reject the modesty guidelines of Pius XI with the claim that they are not infallible.
Well, I mean, how far could you go with that? A child could say to his father, well, I reject what you're telling me because you're not infallible. You're not telling me this infallibly, so I don't have any obligation to obey you. The obligation to obey is not just to obey infallible authority. That's not the only authority there is. There is a pious obedience to an authority that is real. Any true Roman pontiff has that authority over the church. Again, he has to be truly the Roman pontiff, not doubtfully so, questionably so, or an anti-pope, falsely so. But if he really is the Roman pontiff, he does have an authority, let's say, as a father over the church. And one cannot say, well, I don't like what if what you're telling me is not infallible, then I reject it. I don't have to do it. That's not the Catholic way at all. Not at all. That is certainly not the way of Christ. Tom, that there are two different ways the church recognizes its doctrine as infallible. And one is by the constant teaching, a universal teaching of the ordinary magisterium of the church throughout the ages, right? And then when that is questioned, or questions arise about that, then the extraordinary magisterium, coming in the hierarchy, notably the Supreme Pontiff, the Pope, pronounces infallibly on the question to settle it once and forever. Okay? But the ordinary magisterium, the teaching of the church throughout the world, the continuous teaching of the church, is really the ordinary standard for judging the infallibility of the church's doctrine. The recourse to the extraordinary infallibility is only when the question arises. The Orthodox might say, well, the infallibility of the Pope was only proclaimed by the Catholic Church at Vatican I in the middle 1800s. So, that tells you that it wasn't really a thing. But they broke away in 1054, long before the dogma was proclaimed of infallibility of the Pope. Right? But the fact is, the Church proclaims it. The Church infallibly pronounces on it when it becomes necessary to do so. When it is actually regarded as a fact and believed, the Church doesn't have to pronounce on it. So even when the Orthodox broke away back in the year 1054, there were still voices in the Eastern Church that wanted reunion with the Catholic Church. They wanted to recognize the papacy. And the Council of Florence and so on, these councils in the 1400s were an expression of that effort to rejoin the Church. In fact, no sooner had the Eastern Church defected and gone into schism in 1054, that within a matter of 15, 20 years, the emperor in the East, the Emperor of Constantinople, was appealing to the Pope to come to the rescue because he was being threatened by the Seljuk Turks that were invading from the East. And there's already talk about them rejoining the Catholic Church and coming back into the union with the Holy See, with the Pope. It didn't happen. It couldn't have happened at that time. It wasn't until Pope Urban II sent the First Crusade in 1096 that call was finally answered. But nonetheless, I mean, there was already talk about this idea, and the idea of the supremacy of the Roman Pontiff was recognized by the Orthodox, not by the Orthodox Church, by the Eastern Church for all the centuries, for 1,000 centuries before. So it's true, the Church did not define the infallibility of the Roman Pontiff until the middle 1800s. But that actually is a testament to the fact that it was accepted and it was understood. And even with the break of the Orthodox in 1054, the Church didn't find it necessary to actually proclaim that by the extraordinary magisterium, because it was such a constant teaching of the ordinary magisterium of the Church throughout the world at that time. So it's not an argument in their favor, it's an argument against them. against their position, really. But the reason I'm mentioning this is because there's a lot of question being called now against, because of the changes that have taken place with the modernism during and after Vatican II, and the papacy being so degraded that the Catholic people largely have the attitude, well, we'll take what we like and we'll ignore what we don't like. I mean, the dyed-in-the-wool Catholics, so-called now, even the ones who are practicing, even the ones who are going to church at least once a month or so, surveys show that a high percentage of them, well over 90%, some even show 96, 97% of the childbearing age Catholic couples in the world are using artificial birth control, even though it's forbidden. But the papacy, the authority of the papacy has been so degraded after Vatican II that people feel, well, we'll just follow our conscience and do what we think is right. And we don't have to do what they say because it's not infallible, they say. And these are even the ones who still believe there is such a thing as infallibility, but they just dismiss, they can pick and choose what they want to do because they say, well, if it's not infallible, it doesn't count. That is not Christ's idea of the papacy. That is not the Catholic idea of the papacy. That's the Novus Ordo idea of the papacy that is set in here. And this is why the church is suffering so much, and the Catholic people are in such disarray, because they have that attitude. And it is really due to the corruption of the very concept of the papacy in the mind of the Catholic people as a result of the new order that came in from Vatican II.
Yeah.
We need, the only solution to that is a real pope and a great pope. Is a really Catholic pope, not an ecumeniac, not an ecumenical synodal pope of the no order, but a Catholic pope who proclaims the Catholic faith with great courage, even unto martyrdom.
Yep. Your father, a viewer says, some of my family members do not dress very modestly, so how can I teach my children to still respect them, but not imitate them?
So if you're a father or a mother and you have your own children, older children who are dressing immodestly in the house, going out with their friends dressed immodestly, it makes it even more difficult than if it's an aunt or an uncle. Why? Well, because children going up in the same home with their brothers and sisters who are, let's say, dressing immodestly and just disobeying their parents. Their parents are trying to convince the older children to dress modestly and failing to impose that standard on the older children. The younger children are going to be influenced by this because the agents of immodesty are living right under their own roof. They're, in a sense, are their peers in being their own brothers and sisters. And if they see the parents are failing to get the older children to dress modestly, of course, the younger children are going to, in a sense, almost have to choose, between what their parents are telling them and what the older siblings are doing. And it's a very bad situation. I gather, though, from what the question itself, is that this may be the case of a father or mother who has other members in the extended family who are not dressing well. And they're concerned about having their own children not lose respect for those who are dressing immodestly, but again, not follow their poor example. And I think the answer comes down to just exactly that. You have to tell the children that, look, we know they're setting a bad example. They're not dressing immodestly. They're not observing the guidelines that we're giving you. And, we're giving you, our children, these guidelines of your dress, and yet you see your aunts and uncles and your cousins are not following them. Well, you love them and you want them to save their souls and you don't want them to be giving scandal by the way they dress. So we'll pray for them and so on. But we have to set beyond our prayers a good example. Yes, we put our prayers there for them, but we also must join to those prayers our good example in following the prescriptions of modesty of the Church. So you kind of couch it in the sense that we love them and we respect them, but we can't follow bad example from anybody. And that our job now is to set a good example by doing what is right. And so, hopefully the children will love their parents enough and respect their parents enough to follow their parents' example, rather than the examples of, let's say, errant aunts and uncles who might not have any standards of morality, or at least standards of dress in modesty. You just have to explain it to them that way, and explain it to them in a loving way, so that your children grow up and they're concerned for the spiritual welfare of their cousins and their aunts and uncles and so on. That's what love does, right? Love wants the good of the other.
Yeah.
And if they are raised with that love, true charity, they'll want the good of the other, which means they'll want others to practice modesty, and they'll set a good example for them in doing so.